Hello, dear listener, and welcome to a gentle journey through time, where we'll discover that even the brightest minds in history shared something quite intimate with us: the need for rest. As you settle into your comfortable space tonight, perhaps pulling your covers a little closer, take a moment to consider sleep itself. It's one of life's most mysterious gifts, isn't it? Each night, we surrender to something we don't fully understand. This ancient ritual that restores not just our bodies, but somehow renews our very essence. For thousands of years, humans have been told that 8 hours of sleep is the golden rule, a simple formula for a complex mystery. But tonight, as the world grows quiet around you, we're going to discover that history's most extraordinary minds had their own secrets about rest, and their stories might just change how you think about your own journey into sleep. Some of history's greatest thinkers slept far more than you might expect. Einstein, with his luxurious 10-hour nights, dreaming equations that would reshape our understanding of the universe. Others, like Napoleon, conquered empires on just 4 hours of rest, as if sleep itself was a territory to be mastered. But here's what's truly fascinating. There's no single path to genius, no magic number of hours that unlocks creativity. Instead, what we find is something far more beautiful, a symphony of different rhythms, each as unique as the minds that created them. Tonight, we'll walk softly through 4 distinct kingdoms of sleep. First, we'll meet the nappers, those remarkable souls who discovered that genius could be found not in long slumbers, but in brief, magical pauses scattered throughout their days. Then we'll encounter the short sleepers, who seem to compress a lifetime of dreams into just a few hours each night. We'll spend time with the long sleepers, who understood that wisdom sometimes requires patience and plenty of rest. And finally, we'll sit quietly with the irregular and insomniac sleepers, who found their greatest insights in the restless hours when sleep remained just out of reach. Each of these brilliant minds had something to teach us about rest, about creativity, about the gentle art of letting go. And as their stories unfold, perhaps you'll recognize something of yourself in their struggles and discoveries. Perhaps you'll find permission to honor your own unique relationship with sleep. So, let yourself sink a little deeper into comfort now. Let your breathing slow naturally as we begin this journey together. Because tonight, you're not just learning about how geniuses slept. You're discovering that your own rest is part of an ancient, beautiful tradition of minds seeking renewal in the darkness. Our first stop takes us to a moonlit workshop in Renaissance Italy, where one of history's most curious minds was about to revolutionize not just art and science, but sleep itself. In the gentle darkness of a Tuscan night in 1495, while the world sleeps deeply under a canopy of stars, a single candle flickers in a workshop overlooking the Arno River. The flame dances across scattered papers filled with mirror writing, casting shadows that seem to breathe life into sketches of impossible flying machines. Leonardo da Vinci sets down his quill,
the same hand that will soon give the world the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile. But tonight, he's not thinking about painting. He's thinking about something far more radical. What if the secret to boundless creativity wasn't found in the long, traditional sleep that claimed 8 hours of every day, but in something entirely different? You see, Leonardo had discovered something that wouldn't be understood by science for another 500 years, something about the rhythm of rest that most of us never even consider. Picture him now, this extraordinary mind, as he moves through his workshop with the quiet confidence of someone who has unlocked a hidden truth, past his anatomical drawings that reveal the mystery of the human heart, past his sketches of water flowing like liquid music, past inventions that seem to belong to a future he can somehow see but cannot yet touch. He settles into a simple corner of his workspace, not a grand bed, but a humble resting place among his creations. And here's where the magic begins. Leonardo doesn't surrender to sleep for 8 hours like his contemporaries. Instead, he allows himself just 20 minutes of the most exquisite rest. 20 minutes, imagine that. Just long enough for his brilliant mind to soften at the edges, to let go of the day's intense focus and drift into that mysterious realm where consciousness meets dreams. Just long enough for his body to sink into the sweet relief of rest, but not so long that he loses touch with the thread of inspiration that guides his work. What did Leonardo understand that we're only now beginning to discover? That sometimes the most profound rest comes not from lengthy surrender, but from brief, perfect pauses. Every 4 hours, like a gentle rhythm written into his very being, Leonardo would pause his work. Whether he was studying the delicate architecture of a flower's petals by candlelight, or sketching the precise mechanics of a bird's wing at dawn, he honored this sacred cycle. 4 hours of brilliant wakefulness, followed by 20 minutes of the deepest, most restorative rest imaginable. Imagine discovering him there, curled peacefully on a simple cot beside his easel, paint still gleaming wet on a canvas that holds tomorrow's masterpiece. His weathered hands, still stained with the colors of creation, rest gently at his sides. His face, usually animated with endless curiosity, now soft with the innocent peace that only comes with complete surrender to rest. His assistants learned not to disturb these sacred intervals. They understood that Leonardo, in these brief moments of sleep, was still Leonardo at work, just in a different way. His mind, freed from the constraints of logic and the demands of the waking world, would continue its mysterious work beneath the surface of consciousness. And when he woke, always naturally, as if guided by some internal clock more precise than any timepiece, it was often with a new insight, a fresh perspective, a solution to a problem that had seemed impossible just 20 minutes before. Can you imagine what it might feel like to rest with such intention, such trust in the process? To know that even in sleep, your mind continues to work, continues to create, continues to discover. Leonardo lived this truth every day, proving that genius isn't about working harder, it's about working in harmony with the natural rhythms that restore and renew us. His notebooks, filled with thousands of observations and inventions centuries ahead of their time, weren't just the product of tireless effort. They were the fruit of a mind that understood something profound, that creativity needs both the active pursuit of knowledge and the gentle space of dreams to truly flourish. This revolutionary approach to rest didn't end with Leonardo. Across time, other brilliant minds would discover their own ways of harnessing the power of brief, intentional sleep. And as we drift deeper into this story, we encounter another visionary who would electrify the world while barely sleeping at all.
As Leonardo's candle burns low in Renaissance Italy, we travel forward through time to another workshop, another genius, another revolutionary relationship with sleep. It's 1899 now, and the air in a Manhattan laboratory hums with possibility. Coils spark in corners like captured lightning, and the soft buzz of electricity creates a kind of mechanical lullaby that would soothe only one man in all the world. Nikola Tesla. Born during a thunderstorm on a summer night in 1856, a detail that seems written by destiny itself for a man whose life would become synonymous with harnessing the invisible forces that dance through the air around us. Even as a child, there was something electric about Tesla, something that suggested his mind would always be tuned to frequencies the rest of us couldn't even detect. Picture his extraordinary laboratory as the 19th century draws to a close. This is a space where the future lives alongside the present, where ideas that won't be understood for decades take shape in copper wire and spinning magnets. The workshop breathes with innovation. Tesla coils rise like metallic trees, their tops crowned with halos of blue-white electricity. Wires snake across workbenches, like the thoughts of a mind that thinks in currents and voltage. And there, in the center of this electrical wonderland, is Tesla himself, working from 9 in the morning until 6 the following morning, sustained by something that would seem impossible to most of us, just 2 to 3 hours of sleep. But here's what makes Tesla's story so remarkable, so different from simple insomnia or restless exhaustion. He didn't fight sleep or resent its demands. He simply discovered something extraordinary, that his particular genius thrived on a rhythm that was uniquely his own. I do not think there is any thrill that can go through the human heart like that felt by the inventor, he once confided to a friend, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of discovery. I have found that 3 hours of sleep is enough for me. 3 hours. Yet this wasn't deprivation in the way we might imagine it. For Tesla, it was optimization, a way of staying connected to the flow of ideas that seemed to pour through him like the very electricity he studied. Have you ever been so absorbed in something you love that time seems to disappear? When sleep feels less like rest and more like an interruption to the creative flow, Tesla lived in that state of gentle urgency, that space where passion meets purpose. But unlike those who burn themselves out in such intensity, Tesla had learned the secret of strategic rest. Picture him in those precious hours of sleep, sometimes curled up on a narrow cot, tucked between his inventions, surrounded by the gentle hum of transformers and the soft glow of electrical apparatus, sometimes napping in a leather chair, pulled close to a window, his face peaceful as morning light mingles with the artificial aurora of his Tesla coils. One colleague described a particularly magical scene, finding Tesla dozing on a workbench at dawn, his head resting near a softly buzzing electrical coil, looking perfectly at peace despite the symphony of electromagnetic activity surrounding him. And when he woke, suddenly, as if called by some invisible signal, it was with a complete understanding of how alternating current could be improved. Isn't it remarkable how those micro moments of surrender
became launching pads for innovations that would literally illuminate the world. The AC electrical system that powers our homes to this day may have crystallized during one of those brief respites. The wireless technology that connects us across continents could have emerged from a 20-minute nap between experiments. Tesla understood something profound about the relationship between rest and revelation. Sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is pause just long enough for scattered thoughts to arrange themselves into breakthrough understanding. He would take these strategic naps in the most unexpected places. Colleagues would find him asleep on a park bench after walking the streets of Manhattan at sunrise, his mind still processing the previous night's discoveries, or resting peacefully in his hotel room for exactly 30 minutes between experiments, rising refreshed and ready to push the boundaries of what was possible. There's something deeply satisfying about this rhythm, isn't it? This dance between intense focus and brief surrender. Tesla showed us that rest doesn't have to be lengthy to be transformative, that sometimes the most profound restoration comes from allowing ourselves to pause, even briefly, and trust that our minds will continue their essential work beneath the surface of consciousness. As you settle more deeply into your own rest tonight, perhaps you can feel something of Tesla's wisdom, the understanding that your mind, like his, continues its mysterious work even when you're not actively directing it. That rest, in whatever form it takes for you, serves not just your body, but your deepest creative self. Tesla mastered the art of brief, efficient renewal, finding just enough quiet to keep his genius burning bright. But as our journey through the landscape of brilliant sleep continues, we'll discover that some minds found their greatest breakthroughs not in the depths of sleep, but in that magical threshold between waking and dreaming.
From Tesla's electrically charged workshop, we drift like smoke through time to the sun-drenched coast of Spain, where the Mediterranean meets the sky in shades of blue that exist nowhere else on Earth. It's 1935, and in a studio overlooking these impossible waters, another genius is about to discover that the most surreal landscapes aren't painted on canvas, they're found in the moments just before we fall asleep. Salvador Dalí, born in May of 1904 under the warm Spanish sun in the ancient town of Figueras, where Roman ruins dream beneath olive groves. From his earliest years, there was something otherworldly about Salvador, something that suggested his relationship with reality itself would be fluid. Like his famous melting clocks, the boundaries of his world seemed to bend and flow in ways that defied ordinary understanding. Imagine entering his studio on a golden afternoon, where canvases shimmer with impossible visions, elephants walking on spider legs, clocks that drip like honey, landscapes that breathe like living things. The air carries the intoxicating mixture of turpentine and sea breeze, of creativity and something ineffable that hovers at the edges of perception. But perhaps the most intriguing element in this magical space isn't a painting at all. It's something far simpler, far more mysterious. A wooden chair positioned with mathematical precision near a tall window, and on the floor directly below, a metal key resting beside a tin plate. What was Dalí attempting with this strange arrangement? What secret had he discovered about the nature of sleep itself? You see, while Leonardo found genius in brief naps, and Tesla thrived on minimal rest, Dalí became fascinated with something even more elusive. That exquisite moment just before sleep arrives,
when consciousness begins to soften and the mind starts to wander into territories it would never visit while fully awake. His technique was beautifully, almost ceremonially simple. As the afternoon light began to slant through his studio window, Dalí would settle into his chair, not to sleep, but to visit the threshold of sleep. He would hold a heavy metal key in between his fingers, positioned carefully over the tin plate on the floor below. Then, as he allowed his breathing to slow and his eyelids to grow heavy, as he began that gentle journey toward the land of dreams, his conscious mind would gradually release its hold on the waking world. His hand would relax, his grip would soften, and just at that precise moment when consciousness began to fade into something else entirely, the key would slip from his fingers, clatter onto the plate below, and awaken him with its sharp, metallic song. Dalí called this practice slumber with a key, and he spoke of it with the reverence of a scientist describing a new discovery. You must sit in your chair, holding a heavy metal key over a plate on the floor, and as you begin to doze, the key falls, waking you in that precious instant where dreams begin to bloom. Can you imagine that liminal space he was exploring? That magical threshold between the logical world of day and the limitless realm of dreams? Most of us drift through this space unconsciously, but Dalí decided to explore it with the dedication of an archaeologist uncovering ancient treasures. In those brief seconds before the key would fall, his mind would encounter visions that belonged to no earthly landscape, clocks that bent like soft cheese under the heat of time itself, elephants that carried impossible buildings on legs thin as silk threads, staircases that led to doorways in the sky, drawers that opened in the human body to reveal the secret compartments of the soul. The sharp chime of the key hitting the plate would return him instantly to the waking world, but he wouldn't arrive empty-handed. More often than not, he would immediately reach for his sketchbook, capturing the images that had visited him in that fleeting moment between consciousness and dreams. His beloved wife Gala often found him on their terrace overlooking the sea, practicing this ritual as the sound of waves provided a gentle rhythm. She would watch him wake to the sound of the falling key, then immediately begin sketching with an urgency that suggested he was trying to capture something that might evaporate like morning mist if he hesitated even a moment. The iconic melting clocks of the persistence of memory, perhaps his most famous image, may have been born in just such a moment, a brief instant where time itself seemed to soften and flow, revealing its malleable nature to an artist hovering on the edge of sleep. What Dalí understood, in his uniquely surreal way, was something profoundly important about creativity itself, that our most original insights often come not from forced effort, but from allowing the mind to wander into unfamiliar territory. He discovered that the hypnagogic state, that threshold between waking and sleeping, was a landscape as rich and strange as any he could paint. Perhaps you visited this territory yourself without realizing it, those moments when you're drifting off and suddenly have a thought that seems to come from nowhere, an insight that feels both surprising and somehow inevitable, a solution to a problem that has been troubling you, arriving not through struggle, but through surrender. These micro-naps weren't Dalí's only rest. He did sleep for 5 or 6 hours each night in a bedroom adorned with his own surreal creations, where painted dreams watched over his sleeping form. But it was these deliberate moments of threshold crossing that seemed to feed his imagination most directly. There's something deeply peaceful about imagining Dalí in this practice, not the flamboyant, mustachioed performer the world knew, but a quiet figure in a chair by the window, trusting enough in the process of rest to let consciousness slip away, even briefly. The gentle weight of the key in his hand like a small anchor to the waking world, the soft anticipation of the chime that would return him to familiar territory. His approach reminds us of something beautiful, that rest and creativity aren't opposites, they're dance partners. Even the briefest pause, the gentlest loosening of conscious control, can open doorways to possibilities we never knew existed. As you continue to settle into your own rest tonight, you might imagine yourself in that liminal space Dalí loved so much, not quite awake, not quite asleep, but somewhere in between where imagination stirs freely and the impossible becomes possible.
We've walked now through 3 different approaches to the art of napping. Leonardo's rhythmic 20-minute renewals, Tesla's efficient microsleeps between inventions, and Dalí's poetic exploration of the threshold between dreams and waking life. Each discovered that genius doesn't require traditional sleep schedules. Sometimes it requires the wisdom to rest differently, to honor the unique rhythms that allow creativity to flourish. But as the night deepens around us and our journey continues, we encounter another fascinating group of brilliant minds, those who seem to compress entire lifetimes of achievement into just a few precious hours of rest each night. These were the short sleepers, visionaries who found that for them, less truly could be more. Next, we'll meet Thomas Edison, who believed that sleep was time stolen from invention and discovery, yet who understood the secret of the genius gap, that magical moment between exhaustion and rest where inspiration often strikes. We'll encounter Voltaire, who wrote some of the world's most influential philosophy while surviving on just 4 hours of sleep, sustained by what he called the fire of ideas. We'll walk with Napoleon Bonaparte, who conquered continents on minimal rest, discovering that sometimes the mind is sharpest when the body has learned to thrive on less. And we'll sit quietly with Benjamin Franklin, who found wisdom in both early rising and the strategic use of brief, restorative sleep. But for now, let yourself sink just a little deeper into comfort. Feel the weight of your body supported completely, the gentle rhythm of your breathing slowing naturally as these stories of remarkable sleep habits continue to unfold around you like a soft blanket of wonder and discovery. Each brilliant mind we'll meet found their own path to genius, their own way of honoring both the need for rest and the call of creativity. And perhaps as you drift deeper into your own restorative sleep tonight, you'll carry with you the gentle wisdom that there is no single right way to rest, only the way that serves your unique and brilliant mind.
The year is 1879, and we find ourselves in Menlo Park, New Jersey, where the air itself seems to hum with possibility. Here, surrounded by glass bulbs and copper wires, by the scent of heated metal and the whisper of electric current, another extraordinary mind is about to change the world forever. Thomas Edison stands before his workbench, his eyes reflecting the same intensity that will soon illuminate every street corner in America. But Edison carries something Leonardo never did, a fierce, almost angry determination to conquer sleep itself. Where Leonardo danced with rest, Edison declared war upon it. Sleep, Edison proclaimed to anyone who would listen, is a criminal waste of time inherited from our cave-dwelling ancestors. Imagine viewing those peaceful hours that cradle the rest of humanity as obstacles to progress, barriers between yourself and the next world-changing invention. Edison claimed to need only 3 to 4 hours of sleep each night, and he wore this like a badge of honor. His assistants would arrive at the laboratory before dawn to find him exactly as they had left him 12 hours earlier, bent over the same experiment, consumed by the same problem, as if the night had simply ceased to exist around him. But here, dear listener, Edison's story takes a beautifully human turn. This man who scorned sleep, who invented the very bulb that would keep humanity awake long past natural sunset, harbored a secret relationship with rest that revealed the gentle contradictions of genius itself. You see, scattered throughout Edison's laboratory were simple wooden cots, not for guests, not for decoration, but for those inevitable moments when even the most determined mind must surrender to the body's wisdom. And when exhaustion finally claimed him, because it always did, Edison would collapse onto the nearest cot, sometimes clutching his latest creation, sometimes curled up right there on his workbench, among the very inventions that had stolen his sleep. His assistants grew accustomed to discovering him in these moments of profound vulnerability. The great wizard of Menlo Park reduced to the same peaceful breathing as any sleeping child. His face relaxed in a way it never was during his fierce waking hours. One associate wrote, "To see Edison at rest is to understand that genius, too, must bow to the gentle tyranny of human need." But perhaps most remarkable of all was Edison's famous trick with steel ball bearings. Picture this. When exhaustion finally overwhelmed his conscious resistance, he would settle into a chair, steel spheres balanced carefully in his upturned palms. As he drifted toward true sleep, his muscles would relax, the bearings would clatter to the floor, and he would wake, not groggy, not resentful, but with that peculiar clarity that comes from touching the edge of dreams without falling completely into their embrace. It was as if Edison understood, perhaps better than he admitted, that creativity doesn't emerge from the bright lights of consciousness alone, but from the mysterious border country between waking and sleeping, where the impossible becomes suddenly, brilliantly possible. During one such strategic rest, as his conscious mind finally agreed to step aside for a few precious minutes, the solution to the incandescent bulb may have clicked into place, not through more hours of furious experimentation, but in that soft space where logic meets intuition, where problems dissolve into elegant simplicity. His productivity was legendary. Over 1,000 patents bearing his name, inventions that literally illuminated the world, the phonograph that captured sound itself, the foundations of motion pictures that would give us dreams made visible, electrical systems that turn night into day. All of this emerging from a mind that treated sleep as an enemy, yet couldn't quite escape its gentle, necessary pull. As Edison aged, as the laboratories grew larger and the demands greater, perhaps he began to wonder what dreams he might have missed in those stolen hours of rest. What visions might have visited him in the deeper places of sleep that he so rarely allowed himself to explore? We'll never know. But in his final years, even the great enemy of slumber admitted that his brief naps had been in their own way as essential to his inventions as any tool in his workshop. And so the electric light that Edison brought to the world now carries us across the Atlantic, where another brilliant mind was using those very night hours he had conquered for an entirely different kind of illumination, the light of ideas that would reshape not just how we see, but how we think. Imagine, if you will, that Edison's electric light could somehow reach backward through time, illuminating a candlelit study in 18th century Paris. Here, in the winter of 1750, snow falls silently against tall windows, while inside, a slight figure hunches over his writing desk, quill moving with urgent purpose across cream-colored parchment. This is François-Marie Arouet, though history would remember him by another name entirely. Voltaire, and like Edison, he too had declared war on sleep, but his weapons were not electricity and industry. His weapons were words, sharp enough to topple kingdoms, and ideas powerful enough to ignite revolutions. Where Edison battled darkness with electric bulbs, Voltaire fought ignorance with sentences that blazed across the page like literary lightning. And his fuel for this intellectual fire? Coffee. Not just a cup or two, but rivers of coffee. 40 cups a day, some whispered, though surely that must be, well, perhaps not. Perhaps when you're trying to wake up an entire civilization, ordinary measures simply won't suffice. 4 hours of sleep, that was all Voltaire claimed to need, all he would allow himself in a life that burned with the intensity of the Enlightenment itself. 4 precious hours carved from days that overflowed with letters to kings, plays that scandalized courts, and philosophical treatises that still guide us today. But picture Voltaire in those pre-dawn hours when Paris lay wrapped in sleep, and his mind blazed with revolutionary thoughts. His pen would dance across the page, crafting sentences that would echo through history. I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Words born in the quiet hours when most souls were dreaming, yet somehow more awake than anything written in broad daylight. The fascinating contradiction of Voltaire was this: the man who filled his waking hours with the most stimulating substances known to his age, coffee, chocolate, heated intellectual combat, would suddenly, without warning, surrender completely to rest wherever it found him. Visitors to his estate at Ferney would discover him in the most unexpected poses of peaceful slumber. Sometimes his head would be resting gently on a stack of his own manuscripts, as if his dreams were simply an extension of his writing. Sometimes they would find him curled up on a garden bench beneath an ancient oak, with a half-finished letter still clutched loosely in his fingers, the wind gently turning the pages of a book left open beside him. One guest wrote, "Voltaire sleeps little, but when he does, it is as if the world pauses with him, waiting respectfully for his next brilliant thought." There was something almost mystical about these moments, this giant of intellectual rebellion suddenly reduced to the same vulnerable humanity as any sleeping child. Can you imagine the dreams that must have visited him in those brief interludes? Did Candide wander through his sleeping mind, still searching for the best of all possible worlds? Did Pangloss whisper his relentless optimism, while Voltaire's unconscious mind crafted the perfect satirical response? Perhaps those 4 hours of rest were where his sharpest insights were truly born, not in the heat of conscious argument, but in the cool space between his last deliberate thought and his first dream. His chocolate consumption was almost as legendary as his coffee habit. Cups of rich, warming chocolate that sustained him through long nights of correspondence
with the most powerful minds in Europe. Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, Benjamin Franklin, all of them engaged in lengthy written conversations with this sleepless genius who somehow found time to answer every letter, challenge every assumption, question every authority. In an age when censorship was brutal and exile common, Voltaire learned to write in the margins of night, when the authorities slept and his most dangerous ideas could flow freely onto paper. Some of his most revolutionary thoughts, the ones that would later inspire the American and French revolutions, were born in those stolen hours between midnight and dawn, when truth could be spoken without fear. Picture him there, in his simple nightgown, surrounded by books and papers, the candle burning lower as his pen flew across the page. Outside, the France of Louis XV slept peacefully, unaware that in this quiet study, one man was crafting the intellectual ammunition for the revolution that would transform their world forever. And when exhaustion finally overtook even his coffee-fueled determination, Voltaire would simply rest his head wherever he happened to be. No elaborate preparations, no lengthy bedtime rituals, just the sudden, complete surrender of a mind that had given everything to the cause of human enlightenment, trusting that even the briefest rest would restore his extraordinary mental powers. His contemporaries marveled at this ability to find perfect peace anywhere, anytime, for just long enough to recharge those brilliant mental batteries. A cat nap at his writing desk, a moment of tranquility in his garden chair, 20 minutes of sleep in a reading chair with Cervantes or Racine still open across his lap. As dawn broke over that literary battlefield where Voltaire fought his war against ignorance and superstition, his words were already marching across Europe, carrying the light of reason into the darkest corners of the human experience. But soon, those ideas would find themselves tested not in the salons of philosophy, but on the actual battlefields where another short sleeper was learning to find rest between the thunder of cannons and the whisper of destiny.
From the intellectual battlefields of Voltaire's study, we now travel to the actual fields of war, where another master of brief sleep was reshaping not just ideas, but the very map of Europe itself. Picture, if you can, a small canvas tent on the frozen plains of Austerlitz, December 1805. Outside, winter winds carry the tension of 73,000 French soldiers preparing to face the combined might of Austria and Russia. Inside, by the amber glow of a single lantern, a slight figure bends over maps that hold the weight of nations. Tomorrow, these battle plans will either crown him master of Europe or destroy everything he has built. But first, Napoleon Bonaparte must do something that seems impossible under such circumstances. He must sleep. 6 hours for a man, 7 for a woman, 8 for a fool. Such was Napoleon's philosophy, that sleep was a luxury he could ill afford when history itself was waiting to be written. 3 to 4 hours each night, that's all the emperor allowed himself. Yet somehow, impossibly, he found the energy to command armies across continents, to dictate legal codes that still govern us today, to make decisions that would echo through centuries. But here's where Napoleon's story becomes not just remarkable, but deeply, touchingly human. This man who conquered most of Europe had mastered perhaps the most humble skill of all, the ability to find perfect rest anywhere, anytime, for just long enough to restore that legendary clarity that made him seem almost superhuman. His officers would tell stories that still seem impossible today.
Napoleon sleeping in the saddle during forced marches that lasted 20 hours, his body swaying gently with the rhythm of his horse, as if his unconscious mind trusted completely in the animal's steady gait. Imagine that level of surrender, to be so at peace with uncertainty that you could dream while riding toward your destiny. There are accounts of him napping during brief lulls in battle, his head resting against a cannon still warm from firing. The sounds of war, the clash of metal, the shouts of men, the thunder of artillery, all of it fading around him as his mind found that precious pocket of peace. 20 minutes later, he would wake fully alert, ready to adjust his strategy with the diamond-sharp clarity that only true rest can bring. His aide-de-camp, Colincourt, wrote of discovering the emperor asleep by a dying campfire during the retreat from Moscow, wrapped only in his gray military cloak, snowflakes settling like gentle blessings on his shoulders. Even in the midst of one of history's greatest disasters, even as his Grande Armée was dissolving in the Russian winter, Napoleon could still find those moments of perfect peace. When he woke, and he always woke exactly when he intended to, it was as if he had been gathering strength not just for his body, but for his indomitable soul. Can you relate to that feeling of being so utterly exhausted that you could sleep anywhere? Perhaps you've dozed off in an uncomfortable chair during a difficult time in your life, or caught a few minutes of rest during a crisis when your body simply demanded it. Napoleon lived his entire adult life in that state of noble exhaustion, yet he somehow made it not just work, but triumph. Was it discipline that taught him this extraordinary skill, or necessity? Perhaps both. When you're responsible for the fate of millions, when every decision could tip the balance of nations, you learn to take rest when you can find it, not when it's convenient. His secretaries would often find him dictating letters late into the night, correspondence with Josephine, orders for his marshals, diplomatic communications that would reshape alliances, his mind sharp as a Toledo blade, despite having been awake for 18 or 20 hours. Then, without warning, he would simply announce, "I need 10 minutes," and curl up on the nearest couch, falling instantly into the profound sleep of the truly exhausted. 10 minutes later, not 9, not 11, but exactly 10, he would rise as if he had slept for 10 hours, ready to continue reshaping Europe with the stroke of a pen. Think about your own relationship with rest. How many times have you pushed through exhaustion, telling yourself you'll sleep later when the work is done? Napoleon understood something we often forget, that sometimes the most productive thing we can do is pause, breathe deeply, and let sleep restore our clarity before we continue. But there was a cost to this relentless pace, wasn't it? As Napoleon aged, as the campaigns grew longer and more desperate, his supernatural ability to sustain himself on so little sleep began to show its limits. At Waterloo, some historians suggest fatigue may have clouded the judgment of the man who had once seemed invincible. The emperor who could sleep anywhere finally met a battle where rest could not restore what time and endless responsibility had worn away. Yet even in his final exile on the lonely island of St. Helena, stripped of his empire and his armies, Napoleon retained this extraordinary ability to find rest in the most unlikely circumstances. British visitors would sometimes discover him asleep in his garden overlooking the South Atlantic, or curled up in his modest library with Plutarch still open across his chest, as if even in defeat he understood that peace could be found anywhere, if only for a moment. Picture him there, in those quiet interludes between the thunderous events of his life, not the emperor, not the conqueror, but simply a man allowing his body the rest it desperately needed. His breathing slow and steady, his face relaxed in a way it rarely was during his waking hours, finding in sleep the one kingdom that no opposing army could ever take from him. As the mists of history began to gather around the fallen emperor, his example lived on in a very different kind of leader, an ocean away. Where Napoleon had learned to steal sleep from chaos and war, another great figure would approach rest with the precision of a clockmaker and the wisdom of a philosopher.
From the cannons of Waterloo, let us drift gently across the Atlantic to a quieter kind of revolution, where another remarkable mind was discovering that genius need not be frantic, that brilliance could be cultivated through something as simple as honoring both work and rest with equal reverence. Picture Philadelphia in the summer of 1776, in those pivotal weeks when a new nation was being born not through conquest, but through carefully chosen words and revolutionary ideas. While most of the city slept through the humid night, a single candle burned in a modest home on Market Street. By that gentle, steady light, Benjamin Franklin sat at his writing desk, his quill moving with measured purpose across parchment, crafting sentences that would help shape a declaration that still stirs hearts across the world. This was Franklin's secret sanctuary, 4 o'clock in the morning, when the world belonged entirely to him, and his thoughts could unfold without interruption. But unlike the other remarkable souls we've encountered, Franklin's approach to sleep was as methodical and thoughtful as everything else in his extraordinary life. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. You've heard these words before, haven't you? Simple words, almost quaint in their directness, yet they contain the philosophy that would guide one of history's most complete human beings. Franklin didn't just preach this wisdom, he lived it, day after day, year after year, with the consistency of a master craftsman perfecting his art. 6 hours of sleep, from 10 at night until 4 in the morning, not the stolen naps of Napoleon or the coffee-fueled nights of Voltaire, but something entirely different, rest as intentional as any experiment, as carefully planned as any diplomatic mission. Franklin had discovered that sleep, like electricity, followed natural laws, and that working with those laws rather than against them could unlock extraordinary power. Imagine Franklin in those evening hours as the candles of Philadelphia began to flicker out one by one, while his neighbors settled into their beds for 8 or 9 hours of sleep. Franklin was already thinking ahead to tomorrow's possibilities. He would spend a few quiet minutes in what he called examining the day, asking himself what good he had done, what he had learned, what he might do better tomorrow. This wasn't just a man preparing for sleep. This was a philosopher conducting a daily inventory of his soul. Can you relate to that impulse, that desire to find meaning in the day's experiences before letting them fade into dreams? Franklin understood that the transition from waking to sleeping wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, intellectual, a bridge between what had been accomplished and what might yet be achieved. His friends would sometimes find him engaging in what he called air baths, sitting by an open window in his nightclothes, letting the cool evening air wash over his skin before retiring to bed. In an age when most people slept in stuffy, closed rooms, Franklin had discovered something we're only now rediscovering, that fresh air and mindful preparation could transform the quality of rest itself. But here's what made Franklin's approach so different from the other brilliant minds we've encountered. His sleep wasn't a battle to be won or a luxury to be minimized. It was a partnership, a daily collaboration between rest and ambition,
that seemed to multiply rather than compete with each other. Those pre-dawn hours, from 4 until the sun painted the Philadelphia sky in shades of gold and rose, became Franklin's creative sanctuary. While the city still dreamed, he would write, plan, experiment, and invent. The lightning rod that would save countless lives from nature's electrical fury. The Franklin stove that would warm homes more efficiently. Those immortal passages about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How many of them were born in that quiet space between sleep and the world's awakening? Think about your own most creative moments. Are they not often found in the gentle transitions between sleep and waking, between solitude and company, between rest and action? Franklin had somehow turned this insight into a science, structuring his entire life around these precious liminal hours when the mind is most open to wonder. His daily schedule was a thing of beauty, really. 6 hours for sleep, 1 hour for personal care and reflection, 8 hours for meaningful work, whether at his printing press, conducting scientific experiments, or in the halls of government. 3 hours for meals and socializing, and 6 hours for civic duties, correspondence, or quiet contemplation. Every moment accounted for, yet somehow this structure created freedom rather than constraint. Picture him there in those magical pre-dawn moments, perhaps working on Poor Richard's almanac, distilling the wisdom of ages into simple maxims that could guide ordinary people toward better lives. Time is money, he would write, but he understood something deeper, that time well spent on rest could multiply itself in the clarity and energy it brought to waking hours. John Adams, who knew Franklin well, once marveled at his extraordinary vitality, his ability to charm kings and common people alike, to negotiate treaties and conduct groundbreaking experiments with equal brilliance. How does he sustain such remarkable vigor at his age? Adams wondered in his diary. Perhaps the answer lay not in frantic activity, but in the gentle rhythm of disciplined rest and purposeful waking. There's something deeply comforting about Franklin's approach, isn't it? In our age of scattered attention and restless nights, there's profound wisdom in his understanding that sleep and productivity need not be enemies, that rest can be an act of self-respect, a daily investment in our future selves, a recognition that we serve our highest purposes best when we honor our deepest needs. As the Constitutional Convention dragged through that sweltering Philadelphia summer of 1887, delegates would sometimes discover Franklin napping briefly in his chair during the most contentious debates, not from boredom or exhaustion, but from the supreme confidence of a man who knew that his measured approach to rest had prepared him for whatever challenges the day might bring. And when he woke, for he always woke exactly when he intended to, it was with the kind of gentle clarity that could find compromise where others saw only conflict, wisdom where others found only argument. Imagine Franklin there, in the soft glow of candlelight, preparing for another night of restorative sleep. You might find your own breathing beginning to slow down, your own thoughts turning naturally toward rest. Perhaps there's something to be learned from his gentle discipline, not the rigid schedule necessarily, but the understanding that sleep is not time stolen from life, but time invested in living more fully, more wisely, more completely. The last candle in his study would flicker and go out, the city of Philadelphia would settle into deeper silence, and Benjamin Franklin would close his eyes with the satisfaction of a day well lived and the sweet anticipation of tomorrow's possibilities, secure in the knowledge that 6 hours of intentional rest would prepare him for whatever wonders awaited in the endless adventure of being human.
And so we complete our journey among the short sleepers, 4 extraordinary souls who found in brevity what others might seek in abundance. Edison with his strategic naps among the inventions, Voltaire with his coffee-fueled enlightenment, Napoleon with his battlefield rest between moments that shaped continents, and Franklin with his clockwork wisdom that balanced rest and activity in perfect harmony. Each of them discovered, in their own way, that sleep need not be a long absence from the business of changing the world. Instead, they learned to make rest itself a tool of transformation, a brief but profound doorway into the deeper wells of human creativity and insight. But not all great minds thrived on such carefully rationed rest. For some of history's most remarkable thinkers, genius was nurtured not in swift, stolen moments between activities, but in the deep, luxurious embrace of abundant sleep. They understood that the mind, like rich soil, sometimes needs long periods of quiet darkness to generate its most extraordinary flowering. Which brings us to an entirely different relationship with rest, and to 2 figures whose approach to sleep was as revolutionary as any invention or philosophy, though in ways that might surprise you. For in the realm of the long sleepers, we discover that sometimes the greatest insights come not from fighting sleep, but from surrendering to it completely, trusting that dreams themselves might hold the keys to understanding the deepest mysteries of existence. Our next chapter opens with a wild-haired physicist in Princeton, New Jersey, who believed that the universe's greatest secrets might reveal themselves not in the laboratory, but in the gentle country between waking and dreaming. His name was Albert Einstein, and his relationship with sleep would prove just as revolutionary as his theories about the nature of reality itself. After wandering through the restless worlds of Da Vinci, Edison, Voltaire, Napoleon, and Franklin, those brilliant souls who seemed to dance on the very edge of exhaustion, we now find ourselves stepping into a completely different realm, a quieter sanctuary where genius bloomed not in the frantic hours of midnight oil, but in the gentle embrace of deep restorative slumber. Close your eyes for a moment and let yourself drift to a peaceful morning in Princeton, New Jersey. It's 1935, and the world feels soft and unhurried. Golden sunlight filters through tall windows, casting long, lazy rectangles of warmth across wooden floors. Somewhere in this tranquil scene, in a modest bedroom filled with the comfortable clutter of a curious mind, lies the world's most famous physicist, still fast asleep. Albert Einstein rests peacefully beneath his covers, his famous wild hair spread across the pillow like silver threads catching the morning light. His breathing is deep and rhythmic, the breath of someone completely at peace with the world. The bedside clock ticks quietly. 10 o'clock, 11, and sometimes, wonderfully, even past noon. And here's the remarkable thing. Einstein feels absolutely no guilt about this extended slumber. None whatsoever. Can you imagine that? The man who would show us that time itself could bend and stretch, who revealed that energy and matter dance together in perfect mathematical harmony. This same brilliant soul,
understood something that those restless geniuses we just visited had missed entirely. While Edison dismissed sleep as stolen time, while Napoleon grabbed mere fragments of rest between conquests, Einstein had discovered sleep's profound secret. 10 hours? 11? Sometimes a luxurious 12 full hours of uninterrupted rest. Night after night, season after season, year after peaceful year. Picture him there, his face relaxed in sleep, perhaps a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth as dreams carry him through realms of space and time that his waking mind was only beginning to explore. There's something beautifully human about this image, isn't there? The man who unlocked the mysteries of the universe was also someone who could outsleep any teenager, who cherished his morning hours beneath warm blankets the way others might treasure precious jewels. But Einstein's relationship with sleep holds an even more fascinating secret, one that reveals the hidden architecture of genius itself. You see, he didn't confine his rest to nighttime hours alone. Oh no! Throughout his days at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, colleagues would often discover him in the most endearing scene, curled up like a contented cat in his favorite leather armchair, his legs tucked beneath him, one hand resting gently on his chest, while the other held, with the lightest possible touch, a pencil or, sometimes, a silver spoon. Picture this tender moment, Einstein's eyelids growing heavy as he settles deeper into the chair's worn embrace. His breathing slows, becomes deeper, more peaceful. His grip on that pencil grows softer, softer, until gravity itself becomes his gentle alarm clock. The pencil slips from his relaxed fingers, falls to the floor with the softest whisper of sound, and Einstein awakens, not startled, but peacefully, in that magical twilight space between sleeping and waking. What was happening in those precious, drowsy moments? Einstein himself believed, no, he knew, that some of his most profound revelations arrived not when he was hunched over equations at his desk, not during intense debates with fellow scientists, but in these sweet interludes of half-sleep, when his conscious mind stepped gracefully aside to allow something infinitely deeper and wiser to emerge. Can you feel that space, that gentle borderland where logic softens and intuition blooms? Perhaps you've experienced it yourself. Those moments just before fully waking, when solutions to yesterday's puzzles seem to float up from somewhere deep within, as natural as bubbles rising through still water. This is where Einstein's genius truly lived, not in the harsh fluorescent light of pure analysis, but in the golden hour of a rested mind. He once wrote to a dear friend, his words filled with quiet wonder, describing how his theory of relativity first began to take shape. Not in his laboratory, not during fevered midnight calculations, but during those unhurried morning hours, when his mind was fresh and open, still touched by the mysterious wisdom that only comes through dreams. Imagine those revolutionary moments, lying comfortably in his Princeton bedroom, morning light warming the coverlet, Einstein's mind gently turning over the impossible idea that time itself might be flexible, that space could bend and curve like silk in a breeze. These concepts, so alien to everything humanity had believed, emerged from a mind that had been thoroughly, completely refreshed by sleep. Isn't there something profoundly comforting in this? While Edison was battling darkness, Trying to extend every possible working hour, Einstein was discovering that humanity's greatest insights often require us to surrender completely, to trust in the restorative darkness, to believe in the creative power of rest. Picture him now in your mind's eye, this gentle giant of physics, preparing for sleep each evening with the quiet satisfaction of a day thoughtfully spent and the sweet anticipation of a night deeply rested. His bedroom is modest, almost monastic in its simplicity. Books stacked on every available surface like friendly companions. Papers covered with elegant equations scattered across his desk. The soft amber glow of a reading lamp casting dancing shadows on cream-colored walls. As his eyes grow heavy, perhaps he ponders the day's mysteries, the secret behavior of light as it travels across impossible distances, the hidden dance of atoms too small to see, the vast silent waltz of galaxies spinning through the cosmic dark. And as sleep claims him, gently, completely, his breathing deepens into the rhythm of perfect rest, and his mind begins its own mysterious nighttime work. What doors of imagination might swing open when consciousness finally relaxes its watchful grip? What connections form in the quiet laboratories of our sleeping minds? What truths reveal themselves only to those patient enough, trusting enough to let go completely? Einstein's approach to sleep reveals something profound about the very nature of creativity itself. While some brilliant minds race through life, rarely pausing to rest, others, perhaps the wisest ones, discover their greatest power in patience, in the gentle willingness to let ideas percolate slowly and naturally, like morning coffee brewing in the kitchen while the world still sleeps. His long hours of slumber weren't laziness, they were an investment in the future of human understanding. Each night of deep rest was a gift he gave not just to himself, but to all of us, preparing his mind to receive insights that would reshape our understanding of reality itself. But Einstein was not alone in this profound understanding of sleep's creative power. Long before him, centuries earlier, another brilliant thinker had discovered that his deepest insights arrived not through struggle, but through surrender, not in the harsh light of forced thinking, but in the gentle embrace of extended morning rest.
Let us drift back in time now, floating like a peaceful dream through the centuries, until we find ourselves in the cobblestone streets of 17th century Netherlands. Picture, if you will, the pearl-gray light of a Dutch morning filtering through diamond-paned windows, casting intricate patterns of shadow and brightness across the simple wooden floors of a modest philosopher's room. Here, in this quiet sanctuary, lies a young man whose thoughts will one day echo through the halls of every university on earth. René Descartes, the brilliant soul who will declare, "I think, therefore I am," and fundamentally reshape how humanity understands its own existence, rests peacefully in his simple bed, his dark eyes soft with the remnants of dreams, and his mind already beginning its daily dance through realms of pure thought. Imagine him there, wrapped in thick woolen blankets against the gentle chill of a Netherlands morning, watching the play of light and shadow on his bedroom ceiling as if it were the most fascinating theater performance he'd ever witnessed. The church bells of Amsterdam or Leiden
chime softly in the distance. 7 o'clock, 8, 9, 10, and still Descartes remains contentedly horizontal, his body at perfect rest, while his mind wanders through mathematical landscapes and philosophical gardens that exist nowhere but in the realm of pure imagination. 10 hours of sleep, 11, sometimes a gloriously indulgent 12 full hours of rest and gentle waking. In an age when most people rose with the sun and began their labor before the dew had dried, Descartes had discovered something extraordinary about the natural rhythm of his own genius. Could it be that the most profound truths are born not in the frantic activity of daylight hours, but in the sweet stillness of extended rest? Listen to his own words, written with characteristic honesty to a dear friend. "I have never been able to do anything better in the morning than to sleep." But this wasn't merely a confession of laziness. It was the recognition of a deeper truth about how his particular brand of brilliance functioned. Some minds need the sharp clarity of early morning air. Others flourish in the warm, drowsy space between sleeping and waking. Imagine those serene Netherlands mornings in all their gentle detail. The soft whisper of linen sheets as he shifts position, perhaps turning onto his side to better observe a dust mote dancing in a beam of golden sunlight. The distant sound of merchants calling in the marketplace, the clip-clop of horses on cobblestones, the gentle murmur of a city slowly awakening, all of it forming a peaceful symphony that serves as the perfect backdrop for deep contemplation. In these unhurried moments, freed completely from the urgent demands of correspondence, debate, and scholarly obligation, Descartes' thoughts could unfold as naturally as flowers opening to receive the morning sun. What might it feel like to let profound ideas arise so gently, so organically, without forcing or rushing or demanding immediate answers? It was during one such peaceful morning reverie, lying comfortably propped against his pillows with nowhere to go and nothing pressing to accomplish, that Descartes experienced the revelation that would revolutionize mathematics forever. His gaze fell upon a fly, just an ordinary fly, moving with seemingly random purpose across his bedroom wall. But in his relaxed, receptive state of mind, this simple observation sparked something magnificent. Watching that fly's journey, he began to imagine how any point in space, any location in the entire universe, could be described using nothing more than simple numbers. The birth of coordinate geometry, one of the foundational pillars of modern mathematics, emerged not from intense scholarly study at a desk covered with manuscripts and calculations, but from the gentle luxury of extended morning rest and an unhurried mind willing to find wonder in the flight pattern of a common fly. Remarkable, isn't it? While other brilliant minds of his era, Galileo peering through his telescope, Francis Bacon conducting his experiments, Pascal wrestling with probability, Descartes was learning that wisdom often arrives when we're simply patient enough to receive it, when we create spacious moments for insights to emerge as naturally as bubbles rising to the surface of perfectly still water.
His approach to morning reflection became legendary among those fortunate enough to know him personally. Rather than leaping from bed the moment consciousness returned, rather than immediately attacking the day's intellectual challenges, he would lie quietly for hours, letting his mind explore whatever philosophical puzzle had captured his imagination. Sometimes it was the deepest question of all. How can we truly know that anything is real? Other times, his thoughts might drift toward mathematical problems, or perhaps the mysterious relationship between mind and body, between thought and physical existence. Think about your own experience with those drowsy, contemplative morning moments. Haven't you sometimes discovered that your most creative insights arrive not when you're straining to force them into being, but when you're simply available? When your mind is soft and receptive, still touched by the mysterious wisdom that flows through our dreams. Descartes understood this delicate process with an almost mystical intimacy. His masterwork, Meditations on First Philosophy, a book that would influence the thinking of countless generations, emerged directly from these kinds of unhurried morning reflections. Lying peacefully in his Dutch bedroom, watching the light slowly strengthen outside his window, he began the systematic questioning that would lead him to his famous revolutionary conclusion. Picture the moment when this truth revealed itself, not while hunched over manuscripts in some dusty library, not during heated academic debates, but while resting comfortably against his pillows, perhaps with morning light warming his face, as the most fundamental insight of his philosophical life simply dawned on him. Like the sunrise itself, certain revelations cannot be rushed or forced. They arrive in their own perfect time, when conditions are exactly right for their emergence. Even if everything else in existence could be doubted, even if the entire world were nothing more than an elaborate illusion, the very fact that he was thinking, questioning, wondering, proved beyond any doubt that he existed. I think, therefore I am. 4 simple words that would echo through centuries of human thought, born in the gentle space between sleeping and waking. His friends and colleagues, initially puzzled by his unconventional schedule, gradually came to understand that this was simply how Descartes worked best. Some minds race like lightning, others flow like deep rivers. Some burn bright and fast like shooting stars, others glow steady and warm like the morning sun. His particular brand of genius required the luxury of unhurried time to think deeply, time to dream freely, time to let complex ideas settle into crystal clarity. Imagine the profound serenity of those moments, the soft weight of warm blankets, the gentle caress of morning sunlight streaming through ancient windows, and a mind so completely relaxed that the deepest truths could rise to the surface like cream separating from fresh milk. What doors of understanding might open when we stop forcing our thoughts and start simply allowing them to flow? In those peaceful Dutch mornings, while the bustling world went about its urgent business beyond his bedroom window, merchants haggling, students hurrying to lectures, craftsmen beginning their daily work, Descartes was quietly, gently revolutionizing the very foundations of human thought. His extended sleep wasn't an obstacle to productivity. It was the fertile ground from which his greatest contributions grew. By honoring his natural need for rest, by allowing his own unique rhythms to guide his intellectual work, he created the perfect conditions for insights that would illuminate human understanding for centuries to come. As we imagine Descartes there in his morning sanctuary, wrapped in the warm embrace of extended sleep and gentle waking, we can almost feel the peaceful energy of a mind completely at rest with itself and the world. His example whispers to us across the centuries. Sometimes the most profound work we can do is to simply rest, to trust, to allow.
But as we prepare to leave these peaceful chambers of the long sleepers, as we begin to move toward different kinds of brilliant minds entirely, we find ourselves approaching a fascinating contrast. While Einstein and Descartes discovered their genius in the luxurious embrace of extended sleep, while they found their deepest insights in the gentle spaces between sleeping and waking, there existed other magnificent minds, equally brilliant, equally transformative, who danced to entirely different rhythms. Picture now a shift in the very atmosphere around us. The peaceful, sun-drenched bedrooms of our long sleepers begin to fade like a gentle dream, and we find ourselves approaching the restless lamp-lit chambers of souls who wrestled with the night itself. Here, in the shadows just ahead, we'll encounter minds that burned with such intensity they could barely pause for rest. Brilliant spirits who found their inspiration not in sleep's sweet surrender, but in the electric tension of midnight hours, in the strange creativity that emerges when the world sleeps, but the mind refuses to quiet. Winston Churchill, pacing his study at 3 a.m. with cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. Charles Dickens wandering the gas-lit streets of London when honest citizens lay sleeping. Franz Kafka hunched over his desk as dawn approached, pouring his restless thoughts onto paper. Honoré de Balzac, fueled by endless cups of coffee, racing against time itself to capture the stories that burned within his imagination. These were the irregular sleepers, the insomniacs, the night wanderers, whose genius emerged not from rest, but from their very restlessness. Let us drift toward their fascinating, wakeful worlds.
As we drift away from the world of those who surrendered completely to sleep's embrace, we find ourselves drawn into a different realm entirely, a realm where rest becomes an art form, where the conventional rules of night and day bend to the will of extraordinary minds. Here, in this twilight space between waking and sleeping, we discover something profound about the nature of human resilience. For not all great minds found their peace in the traditional rhythms of dawn and dusk. Some discovered that strength could be found in fragments, that wisdom might emerge from the spaces between exhaustion and renewal. Our first guide through this landscape of unconventional rest is a man whose very name evokes images of cigars and defiance, of wartime speeches that stirred nations, and peacetime wit that charmed dinner parties. But tonight, as we settle into the gentle embrace of our own rest, we discover a softer side to Winston Churchill, a man who understood, perhaps better than anyone, that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply pause. Picture, if you will, the golden light of a November afternoon in 1874, filtering through the tall windows of Blenheim Palace. In one of those sunlit rooms, Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill draws his first breath, already somehow seeming restless, as if he senses that his relationship with sleep will be anything but ordinary. Even as a small child, there were signs. While other children napped peacefully through lazy afternoons, young Winston's eyes would remain bright and alert, his mind already racing with questions about the world beyond his nursery walls. His nanny, Mrs. Everest, would find him lying quietly in his crib, not crying or fussing, but simply observing, watching the patterns of light dance across the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the household, absorbing everything with an intensity that seemed almost adult. But it was during the crucible of the Second World War that Churchill's unconventional relationship with sleep would become legendary. Picture those dark days of 1940, when the fate of Britain, indeed of the free world, hung in the balance. The Luftwaffe's bombs fell like deadly rain across London's ancient streets, and in the underground bunkers of Whitehall, one man carried the weight of a nation's survival on his shoulders. You see, Churchill's days stretched impossibly long during those years. Mornings that began before dawn with urgent dispatches from the front lines. Afternoons spent in the House of Commons, his voice rising and falling with the cadence of democracy itself. Evenings that dissolved into night as he huddled over maps with his generals, tracing the movements of armies across continents. Most men would have crumbled under such pressure. Most would have sought refuge in long, uninterrupted sleep. But Churchill discovered something that physicians and sleep researchers would only begin to understand decades later. That sometimes the secret to endurance lies not in marathon sessions of rest, but in the art of strategic renewal. He slept only 5 to 6 hours each night, often not retiring until well past 2 in the morning, his mind still crackling with the day's decisions and tomorrow's challenges. But then, and here is where the magic happened, sometime between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, regardless of what crisis demanded his attention, Churchill would simply disappear. Imagine the scene. Perhaps it's a particularly tense afternoon in 1941. The Battle of Britain rages overhead, Spitfires dancing their deadly ballet with Messerschmitts in the pewter sky. And in the underground bunkers of Whitehall, ministers and generals pace nervously, awaiting crucial decisions from their Prime Minister. And where is Winston Churchill, the man upon whom so much depends? He is upstairs in a small, simply furnished bedroom, having drawn the blackout curtains against both the afternoon sun and the occasional whistle of falling bombs. He has loosened his famous bow tie, removed his jacket, and settled into bed wearing nothing but his silk underwear, a habit that amused and occasionally scandalized his staff. His ever-present glass of whiskey sits within easy reach on the bedside table, catching the filtered light like liquid amber. This wasn't mere indulgence. This wasn't the luxury of a man who could afford to ignore the world's troubles. This was strategy, as carefully planned as any military campaign. Churchill called these interludes his blessed oblivion, and in that phrase we hear something almost religious, something that speaks to the sacred nature of rest itself. Nature has not intended mankind to work from 8 in the morning until midnight without that refreshment of blessed oblivion, which, even if it only lasts 20 minutes, is sufficient to renew all the vital forces. He once wrote to his wife Clementine. 20 minutes. Such a small amount of time, really. Yet in those brief interludes, something remarkable happened. The crushing weight of leadership would lift from his shoulders.
The constant chatter of urgent decisions would quiet to a whisper, and in that silence, that temporary withdrawal from the world's demands, his mind would find the space it needed to reorganize, to prioritize, to discover new angles on seemingly impossible problems.
His personal secretary, John Colville, left us wonderful glimpses of these afternoon sanctuaries. Sometimes he would find Churchill fast asleep in his chair during cabinet meetings, his colleagues waiting patiently as soft snores escaped him, their expressions mixing exasperation with affection. Other times, Churchill would doze in the back seat of his Rolls-Royce between appointments, his famous Homburg hat tipped over his eyes, only to awaken at journey's end with a brilliant new phrase for that evening's speech. One of his closest friends, Lord Beaverbrook, observed something beautiful about these moments. "Mr. Churchill sleeps as if he's recharging for battle," he said. "His nap's a secret weapon against the storms of war." What a lovely way to think about rest, isn't it? Not as weakness or self-indulgence, but as strategic preparation for the challenges ahead. And indeed, those brief siestas seemed to work magic on Churchill's legendary powers of expression. Consider those speeches that still send shivers down our spines today. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets." Words that emerged from a mind refreshed by strategic rest, thoughts given time to percolate in those quiet afternoon hours. His prolific writing, 6 volumes on the Second World War, his multi-volume history of the English-speaking peoples, the essays and articles that would earn him the Nobel Prize for Literature, much of it flowed from this delicate balance of intensity and restoration. While other leaders pushed themselves to the breaking point, Churchill had learned to dance with his own energy, to honor both the demands of leadership and the needs of his human spirit. Picture him in those wartime years, emerging from his afternoon rest like a man reborn. Perhaps it's 4 o'clock on a gray London afternoon, the city still reeling from the previous night's bombing. Churchill appears in the map room, refreshed, alert, ready to absorb the latest intelligence reports. His staff notices the change immediately, the renewed energy in his step, the sharper focus in his blue eyes, the way his mind seems to attack problems from entirely new angles. There's something almost mystical about this transformation, isn't there? How a brief withdrawal from the world's demands can return us to ourselves, renewed and ready for whatever comes next. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Churchill's afternoon siestas was how they became a form of sanctuary, not just for his body, but for his imagination. In those quiet moments between sleep and waking, his mind would wander down paths that the pressures of leadership normally closed off. Ideas for paintings would surface. Churchill was an accomplished artist, finding solace in watercolors and oils. Memories of happier times would bubble up, refreshing his spirit for the battles ahead. Sometimes, in those drowsy afternoon hours, he would compose letters to his beloved Clementine, his handwriting growing loose and affectionate as sleep approached. "My darling, I have stolen a few moments from the war to think of you, of our garden at Chartwell, of the pond where our black swans glide so peacefully." Even in the midst of humanity's greatest conflict, those brief rests allowed him to remain connected to beauty, to love, to the gentle things that make life worth defending. As you settle into your own rest tonight, perhaps you can imagine Churchill in one of those precious afternoon interludes. Picture the quiet of that small bedroom, the way the light filters through heavy curtains, the sense of sanctuary carved out of chaos. Feel how even the briefest pause can restore not just energy, but perspective. How sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply allow ourselves to drift, trusting that we will return renewed. There's wisdom here for all of us, isn't there? In our own busy lives, those moments when we steal away for a brief rest, 15 minutes with our eyes closed, a quiet pause between the day's demands, maybe they're not guilty pleasures, but strategic necessities. Sacred pauses that honor our human need for restoration, that help us return to our responsibilities with clearer vision and steadier hearts. Churchill's discovery that rest could be both brief and profound opens a door to understanding that sleep itself need not follow conventional patterns to be deeply nourishing. But if Churchill found renewal in strategic afternoon pauses, our next companion in these unconventional hours discovered something entirely different.
As we drift away from Churchill's carefully orchestrated afternoon sanctuaries, we find ourselves drawn into the gas-lit shadows of Victorian London, where another restless mind transformed sleeplessness into something extraordinary. Here, in the narrow cobblestone streets where fog rolls off the Thames like living ghosts, we encounter a different kind of nocturnal artist, one who discovered that when sleep refuses to come, the night itself might become a collaborator. Charles Dickens entered the world on a cold February morning in 1812 in the seaport town of Portsmouth. Even as a child, there was something wakeful about him, something that suggested his nights would never be entirely peaceful. His mother, Elizabeth, would later recall finding young Charles at his bedroom window in the small hours, not crying or restless, but simply gazing out at the world with an intensity that seemed far beyond his years. He watched the night as if it had stories to tell him, she once confided to a neighbor. How prophetic those words would prove to be. As Charles grew, so did his complicated relationship with sleep. While other children surrendered easily to bedtime tales and lullabies, Charles would lie in his narrow bed, his mind spinning with the characters and adventures from the books he devoured during the day. Sleep seemed less like rest than like interruption, a necessary pause that kept him from the stories that lived and breathed in his imagination. But it was in his adult years, when he had become the most celebrated novelist of his generation, that Dickens' nocturnal habits would become truly legendary. Picture, if you will, his comfortable home at 48 Doughty Street, where the sounds of a bustling Victorian household, children's laughter, servants' footsteps, the steady tick of the grandfather clock gradually fade as evening settles over London. Most of his family retires early, following the sensible rhythms of respectable Victorian life. But Charles paces. He moves through his study like a caged lion, too restless for books, too agitated for conversation. His daughter Mary would later write in her diary, "Papa seems to need little sleep, for his pen is always moving, even when the world is quiet. But sometimes, when sleep will not come at all, he simply disappears into the night." And disappear he would. When insomnia wrapped around him like London fog, which it did with increasing frequency, Dickens would leave the warmth and comfort of his home and step into the city's labyrinthine embrace. These weren't casual evening strolls or brief walks to clear his head. These were epic journeys that could last for hours, carrying him through neighborhoods both fashionable and forgotten, past the grand theaters of the West End,
and into the narrow alleys where London's desperate and destitute made their homes. Imagine yourself walking beside him on one of these midnight expeditions. The year is 1843, and the first whispers of what will become a Christmas carol are beginning to stir in his restless mind. The streets glisten with moisture from the evening's drizzle, and gas lamps create pools of yellow light in the darkness, each one an island of illumination in an ocean of shadow. Your footsteps echo against the cobblestones as you follow Dickens through Whitechapel, past the sailors' lodging houses where men sleep 3 to a bed, if they're lucky enough to afford even that small comfort. You pause with him outside a bakery where the day's unsold bread will be distributed to whoever can pay a penny for a night's shelter on the floor. In the dim light filtering through dirty windows, you glimpse faces that will later become characters in his novels. The hollow-cheeked children who inspired Oliver Twist, the exhausted seamstresses who would populate the chimes. There's something almost mystical about wandering through a great city when it's supposed to be asleep, isn't there? Perhaps you've experienced this yourself, those moments when rest eludes you and you find yourself drawn to a window, watching the play of shadows and light in the empty street beyond. The world feels different in these hours, more honest somehow, as if the masks we wear during daylight have been set aside. For Dickens, these nocturnal wanderings became a form of research, though he might never have called it that. Each sleepless night was an opportunity to witness London's hidden life, the life that most of his comfortable middle-class readers never saw. In doorways and under bridges, he encountered the forgotten souls who would populate his novels. The crossing sweepers and mudlarks, the flower girls and chimney sweeps, the clerks struggling to maintain respectability on 12 shillings a week. All of them became real to him during those hours when sleep refused to come.
His friend and biographer, John Forster, once described finding Dickens at dawn, collapsed on the sofa in his study, still wearing his walking coat, his boots muddy from the night's journey. A half-written page lay beside him, filled with descriptions that could only have come from direct observation. The way gaslight caught the tears on a beggar's face, the sound of footsteps hurrying through fog, the smell of poverty and hope mingling in the London air. Even his sleep seemed temporary, Forster wrote, as if he were merely pausing between chapters of a larger, more wakeful story. There was something ritualistic about Dickens' approach to the few hours of rest he did manage to capture. He insisted that his bed face north, a peculiar habit that amused his household staff, but spoke to his deep need for order amidst the creative chaos of his nocturnal life, as if even in sleep he was trying to align himself with some invisible current that might bring peace to his restless spirit. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Dickens' sleepless nights was how they became incubators for his greatest works. A Christmas Carol, that immortal tale of redemption that has comforted readers for generations, was written in just 6 weeks during the autumn of 1843, a period when insomnia plagued him most severely. But rather than fighting against his sleeplessness, Dickens seemed to embrace it, allowing the story to unfold during those long wakeful hours when the boundaries between imagination and reality grew thin.
picture him in his study at 3 o'clock in the morning, the fire burning low in the grate, a single candle flickering on his desk. Outside, London sleeps fitfully under a blanket of fog. But inside, in that circle of golden light, magic is happening. The figure of Ebenezer Scrooge takes shape on the page, his journey from miser to benefactor unfolding with a clarity that could only come from a mind freed from the constraints of ordinary daylight thinking. The ghosts that visit Scrooge, the spirits of Christmas past, present, and yet to come, they seem to emerge from those same twilight hours when Dickens wandered London's streets, observing the interplay of wealth and poverty, hope and despair. The story's vivid descriptions of London's underbelly weren't imagined, they were witnessed, step by step, through streets that most of his readers would never walk. What stories might we discover if we could embrace our own restless nights with such curiosity and openness? Dickens understood something profound about the relationship between sleeplessness and creativity. While his contemporaries dreamed in their comfortable beds, he was collecting dreams. While they rested, he was gathering the stories that would touch hearts for generations to come. His insomnia became not a burden to be endured, but a gift to be explored. There's something deeply human about this rhythm, isn't there? Sometimes our minds are most alive when they're supposed to be quiet. Sometimes inspiration comes not in comfort and routine, but in the restless spaces between sleep and waking, in the liminal hours when the ordinary world takes on extraordinary significance. Dickens' nocturnal journeys gave us more than just individual stories. They gave us an entire world. The London of Dickens' novels, with its fog-shrouded streets and hidden courtyards, its colorful characters and intricate social tapestries, was born in those sleepless hours when he walked among its shadows, observing and absorbing and transforming what he witnessed into art. As you settle into your own rest tonight, perhaps you can imagine yourself walking alongside Dickens through those gas-lit streets, not with his insomnia, but with his sense of wonder. Picture the gentle fog rolling off the Thames, the soft echo of footsteps on wet cobblestone, the way gaslight creates intimate circles of warmth in the vast darkness of the city. Maybe there's something beautiful in knowing that while you drift peacefully toward sleep, somewhere in the space between waking and dreams, stories are still being born. Characters are still finding their voices. The restless energy that kept Dickens walking through London's nights continues to walk through the pages of books that comfort us still, reminding us that even sleeplessness can be transformed into something beautiful when approached with the right spirit of curiosity and compassion. But if Dickens found his inspiration in the external world of London's streets, our next companion discovered that insomnia could lead to even stranger territories.
From Dickens' wandering midnight walks through London's tangible streets, we now drift into a more ethereal realm, the inner landscape of Prague, where another sleepless mind discovered that the most profound journeys happen not through external streets, but through the labyrinthine corridors of consciousness itself. In the enchanting summer of 1883, Franz Kafka was born into the ancient city of Prague, a place where Gothic spires pierce the sky like frozen prayers, where narrow cobblestone streets wind through shadows that seem older than memory itself. This was a city caught between languages and cultures, between German and Czech, between Jewish tradition and modern uncertainty. And into this liminal world came a child who seemed destined to live his entire life in the spaces between sleeping and waking, between reality and dream, between the comprehensible and the mysterious. Even as a young boy, Franz possessed an unusual relationship with the night. While his classmates slept soundly in their comfortable beds, young Kafka would lie awake in his small room above the family's fancy goods shop, listening to the distant chiming of Prague's countless church bells, marking the passage of hours that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. His mother, Julie, would sometimes find him in the morning, not tired or cranky as other children might be after a sleepless night, but peculiarly alert, as if those wakeful hours had brought him something the sleeping world could never offer. "Franz doesn't seem to dream when he sleeps," she once confided to a neighbor. "But when he's awake at night, his dreams seem to dream him." What profound territories might open to us in those quiet hours when sleep eludes our grasp. As Franz grew into young adulthood, his nocturnal habits became more pronounced. By day, he lived a life of methodical routine, working as an insurance inspector for the Workers' Accident Insurance Institute, processing claims with the same meticulous attention to detail that would later characterize his writing. But when the Prague office buildings emptied at the end of each workday, and most citizens settled into their evening routines, Franz's true day was just beginning. Picture his modest room in his family's apartment at the edge of Prague's Old Town. The space is sparse, almost monastic. A narrow bed that he rarely used before midnight. A simple wooden desk positioned to catch what little light filtered through the small window. Shelves lined not with books of law and insurance regulations, but with volumes of literature that seemed to whisper to him in the darkness. He managed perhaps 4 or 5 hours of sleep, when sleep came at all. But more often, Franz found himself caught in that strange twilight state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness, where the mind seemed to operate according to different rules than those that govern our daylight thoughts. He once wrote in his diary, and his diaries are treasures, intimate glimpses into a soul wrestling with itself. "My sleep is so thin, it's like a threadbare blanket, letting every thought creep through its holes." Imagine that sensation for a moment. Sleep so delicate that every worry, every half-formed idea, every fragment of story could slip through its holes and keep him company in the darkness. For most of us, this would be torment. For Kafka, it became the source of his most powerful art. In those hushed insomniac hours, when Prague settled into slumber around him, something extraordinary would happen. Kafka would light his single candle, he preferred candlelight to the harsh glare of electric bulbs, and begin to write. But these weren't the careful, measured sentences of his insurance reports. This was something else, entirely, something that seemed to flow from a deeper, stranger place. The stories that emerged from those sleepless nights carry the peculiar logic of dreams, or perhaps more accurately, the logic of that liminal state between dreaming and waking, where anything might be possible. The metamorphosis,
Perhaps his most famous tale tells of Gregor Samsa, who awakens one morning to find himself transformed into a monstrous insect. Think about that premise for a moment. How perfectly it captures the disorientation we sometimes feel when emerging from sleep. That momentary confusion about who we are and where we belong in the world. But Kafka wrote this story not from the perspective of someone who had slept and dreamed, but from someone who had spent the night in that strange, wakeful state where transformation seemed not only possible, but inevitable. In his diary, he recorded writing the entire first section of the Metamorphosis in a single night, working by candlelight until dawn crept through his window, his hand cramped from hours of continuous writing. His friend Max Brod, the friend who would later save Kafka's works from the flames the author had requested consume them, once found Franz at daybreak, collapsed at his desk, his head resting on a pile of manuscripts, his hand still clutching his pen. He had written through the entire night, pouring his restless energy into stories that would outlive him by decades. Tales that continue to resonate with readers who recognize something familiar in their strange landscapes. What might it feel like to live constantly within the world of your own imagination, even as ordinary sleep remains elusive? There's something almost mystical about the way Kafka's insomnia shaped his artistic vision. His stories read like reports from a country where the usual rules don't apply, where a man might turn into an insect, where vast bureaucracies exist for no discernible purpose, where castles loom on distant hills but can never be reached. These aren't the products of ordinary dreaming, but of something stranger and more sustained, the visions that emerge when consciousness itself becomes fluid, when the boundary between inner and outer worlds grows thin. The Trial, that maze-like story of Joseph K's inexplicable prosecution, seems to have emerged from those same sleepless hours when Kafka would lie in bed staring at the ceiling while his mind constructed elaborate scenarios of guilt and judgment. The castle, with its unreachable goal and endless bureaucratic delays, mirrors perhaps his own sense of being forever on the threshold of some essential understanding that remained just out of reach. His letters to Felice Bauer, the woman he loved but could never quite bring himself to marry, are filled with descriptions of these sleepless nights. He writes about lying awake, images from his stories swirling through his thoughts, keeping him company in the solitude. Sometimes he sounds weary. The night is long and filled with strange visitors, he tells her. But there's also something like gratitude there, as if he understood that his insomnia was also his gift. "I am made of literature," he wrote to her once. "I am nothing else, and cannot be anything else." And indeed, in those wakeful hours, the boundaries between Kafka the man and Kafka the writer seemed to dissolve completely. He didn't simply write stories, he seemed to inhabit them, to live within their strange logic until the first light of dawn reminded him that there was also an external world that demanded his attention.
From Kafka's ethereal Prague nights, where reality bent like candlelight shadows, we arrive now at perhaps the most extreme practitioner of unconventional rest, a man who transformed the very concept of sleep from a daily necessity into strategic fuel for an almost superhuman creative ambition. Here, in the bustling literary salons of 19th century Paris, we encounter Honoré de Balzac, whose relationship with sleep defied not just convention, but what most of us would consider the basic requirements of human endurance. In the gentle spring of 1799, Honoré de Balzac was born in Tours, France,
into a world still trembling with the aftershocks of revolution, where the old certainties had crumbled and new possibilities stretched endlessly ahead. From his earliest years, there was something voracious about Honoré, not just in his appetite for food or experience, but in his hunger for time itself, as if he sensed that a normal human lifespan might not be enough to contain all the stories he needed to tell. Even as a young man studying law in Paris, Balzac chafed against the conventional rhythms of daily life. While his classmates followed the predictable patterns of morning lectures and evening socializing, Honoré found himself increasingly drawn to the mysterious possibilities of the night. But unlike Dickens, who wandered through external streets, or Kafka, who explored inner landscapes, Balzac discovered something different, that the deepest night hours could be transformed into the most productive time of all. Picture, if you will, a modest apartment on the Rue Lesdiguières in the 1820s. Most of Paris is settling down for the evening, families gathering around dinner tables, theaters filling with elegantly dressed audiences, and cafes buzzing with the conversations of those who live by daylight's rules. But in one small room above a printer's shop, something entirely different is happening. As the sun sets over the Seine, and most people prepare for their evening's entertainment, Balzac is preparing for bed. But this isn't surrender to exhaustion, this is strategy. For Balzac had discovered something remarkable about his own inner rhythms. While most writers worked during daylight hours, his mind reached its peak clarity in the absolute silence of the deep night, when the world around him had completely surrendered to sleep. His routine seemed almost impossible, even by the standards of dedicated writers. Sleep from 6 in the evening until 1 in the morning. Just 7 hours of rest, then work continuously for the next 16 hours. 16 hours! Imagine that level of sustained creative intensity, that complete devotion to the worlds taking shape in his imagination. What might it feel like to live in cycles dictated entirely by the demands of inspiration? At exactly 1 o'clock in the morning, Balzac would rise from his brief sleep like a man returning from another world. The Paris around him would be completely still, no carriages clattering over cobblestones, no vendors calling their wares, no social obligations or worldly distractions. Just silence and darkness, and the infinite possibility of blank pages waiting to be filled. He had a ritual, almost sacred in its precision. First, he would wrap himself in his famous white robe, not the dressing gown of a man preparing for leisure, but the working uniform of someone about to enter battle with his own imagination. This white robe became legendary among his friends and colleagues, a symbol of his dedication that was both admired and slightly feared. Then came the coffee. But this wasn't the casual cup or two that might sustain an ordinary writer through a few hours of work. Balzac consumed coffee like fuel for a great engine, cup after cup of strong, black coffee, each one sharpening his focus, accelerating his thoughts, keeping his pen racing across pages with almost supernatural speed and endurance.
Then came the coffee. But this wasn't the casual cup or two that might sustain an ordinary writer through a few hours of work. Balzac consumed coffee like fuel for a great engine, cup after cup of strong black coffee, each one sharpening his focus, accelerating his thoughts, keeping his pen racing across pages with almost supernatural speed and endurance. He once wrote to his friend Madame Hanska, the Polish countess who would eventually become his wife, "I live by coffee and by night. Sleep is but a pause, a moment to gather strength
for the page that calls to me in the darkness. Can you imagine that relationship with your craft, where rest becomes not an end in itself, but simply preparation for the real work of living? But perhaps most remarkably, those coffee-fueled hours of deep-night writing weren't producing mere scribbles or rough drafts. From Balzac's pen flowed finished prose of extraordinary richness and complexity, entire chapters of novels, detailed character studies, scenes so vivid and complete that they required little revision. His masterwork, La Comédie Humaine, the Human Comedy, wasn't just a collection of novels, but an entire universe, an interconnected world of characters as complex and varied as life itself. Picture him at 3 o'clock in the morning, the deepest hour of the Parisian night. The only sounds of the gentle bubbling of coffee on his small stove and the steady scratch of his pen across paper. In the pool of candlelight at his desk, magic is happening. Père Goriot, the tragic father figure of Parisian society, takes shape on the page. Eugénie Grandet, trapped between love and avarice, begins to breathe with literary life. The ambitious Rastignac plots his rise through the salons of the aristocracy. These weren't just fictional characters to Balzac. They were as real as anyone he might meet walking the streets of Paris during daylight hours. More real, perhaps, because he had created them himself, breathing life into them during those sacred hours when the rest of the world had abandoned consciousness. His friend Victor Hugo once described visiting Balzac's apartment at dawn and finding him collapsed in his writing chair, still wearing that famous white robe, his head resting on a stack of manuscripts, his coffee cup empty beside him. Even in exhaustion, Hugo noted, there was something almost holy about the scene. A writer who had given everything to his art, who had transformed the basic human need for sleep into fuel for immortal literature. There's something both inspiring and slightly mad about Balzac's dedication, isn't there? The sheer audacity of believing that human will and coffee could sustain such an intense creative pace. And for years, the most productive years of his career, it worked. He produced novels at a rate that seems impossible by contemporary standards, nearly 100 works of fiction in his relatively short life, each one dense with psychological insight and social observation. But what's perhaps most remarkable is how Balzac used those abbreviated hours of sleep. When he did retire, those precious 7 hours from evening until midnight, he demanded absolute silence. Even the softest sound, he believed, could disrupt the delicate process by which his unconscious mind organized the stories that would emerge in the darkness. His sleep wasn't just rest, it was preparation, a gathering of forces for the creative explosion that would follow.
Picture him during those brief hours of sleep, his mind, perhaps, still spinning with the characters he'd been writing, the plots that were unfolding, the scenes that would demand his attention when darkness fell again. Even in rest, he seemed to be working, his dreams tangling with the lives he was creating on paper. There's something almost mythical about imagining Balzac in those deep night hours, the white robe flowing around him like ceremonial garments, the gentle glow of candlelight illuminating pages covered with his distinctive handwriting, the quiet satisfaction of a mind completely absorbed in creation. Not peaceful in the conventional sense, perhaps, but purposeful in a way that transcends ordinary rest. His routine couldn't last forever, of course. The human body, no matter how driven by creative passion, has its limits. But during those intense, concentrated years when he lived by this extraordinary schedule, Balzac managed to capture something essential about French society, about human ambition and desire and folly that continues to resonate with readers today. What's perhaps most beautiful about Balzac's story is how he transformed what might have seemed like deprivation, those dramatically shortened hours of sleep, into abundance. While others slept for 8 or 9 hours and still felt tired, Balzac discovered that 7 hours of truly restorative rest, combined with absolute dedication to his craft, could sustain a level of creative output that seems almost impossible. His coffee may have been the fuel, but the real secret lay in the quality of his attention during those night hours. When the world around him had completely surrendered to sleep, when there were no social obligations or worldly distractions, Balzac found himself in a state of pure focus that daylight hours, with all their interruptions and demands, could never provide. Imagine him emerging from his brief afternoon sleep, for yes, eventually, even Balzac needed those few moments of midday rest, refreshed not just in body, but in spirit, ready to lose himself once again in the worlds taking shape beneath his pen. The cycle would begin anew: evening sleep, midnight awakening, 16 hours of sustained creation that most of us can barely imagine. As you settle into your own rest tonight, perhaps you can draw inspiration not from Balzac's extreme habits, but from his understanding that sleep, however brief or unconventional, can become a sacred preparation for whatever calls us most deeply. Whether it's creative work or simply the ordinary challenges of daily life, there's something beautiful in the idea that rest, even abbreviated rest, can restore not just our energy, but our sense of purpose. Picture that scene one final time. Balzac at his desk in the deepest hour of the Parisian night, candlelight flickering across pages that will outlive him by centuries, his white robe a symbol of dedication to something larger than himself, the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where he needs to be, doing exactly what he was born to do. And so we leave our irregular sleepers, Churchill with his strategic afternoon pauses, Dickens with his midnight wanderings through London streets, Kafka with his candlelit transformations of sleeplessness into art, and Balzac with his coffee-fueled nights of literary creation. Each discovered that rest need not follow conventional patterns to be deeply restorative, that the human spirit can find renewal in the most unexpected rhythms.
And so our journey through the sleep habits of history's greatest minds draws to its gentle close. We have wandered with the short sleepers who discovered that brilliance could flourish on minimal rest, finding in their abbreviated nights an efficiency that allowed them to pack lifetimes of achievement into their waking hours. We have rested alongside the long sleepers who understood that profound insights often require the deep restoration that comes only from extended surrender to sleep's embrace. We have walked the midnight streets with the irregular and insomniac sleepers, Churchill with his strategic afternoon sanctuaries, Dickens with his wandering explorations through London's gaslit shadows, Kafka with his candlelit transformations of sleeplessness into art, and Balzac with his coffee-fueled nights of literary creation. Each showed us that rest need not follow conventional patterns to be deeply nourishing, that the human spirit can find renewal in the most unexpected rhythms. And finally, we have discovered the wisdom of the nappers, Tesla with his precisely measured moments of restoration, and Dalí with his artistic expeditions to the very threshold of dreams,
who taught us that sometimes the most profound rest comes not in lengthy escapes from consciousness, but in brief, perfectly timed moments of surrender that refresh both body and spirit. What emerges from all these varied approaches to sleep is something beautiful and reassuring. There is no single right way to rest. Each of these extraordinary individuals found their own rhythm, their own relationship with sleep that honored both their human needs and their unique gifts. Some thrived on 4 hours, others required 10. Some found their peace in the deep night, others in the drowsy afternoon. Some wrestled productively with insomnia, while others learned to dance delicately at the very edge of dreams. The common thread that runs through all their stories is not the specific pattern of their sleep, but their willingness to listen to their own rhythms, to honor their individual needs rather than forcing themselves into conventional molds. They understood something that our busy, always connected world sometimes forgets, that rest is not a luxury or a waste of time, but an essential part of the creative process itself. As you settle into your own rest tonight, whether it comes easily or requires patience, whether it lasts a few hours or many, you join an ancient and honorable tradition. You become part of the same mystery that restored Da Vinci and Einstein, that sustained Churchill through his nation's darkest hours, that fed Dickens' imagination as he wandered through Victorian London, that allowed Tesla's gentle genius to illuminate the world. In the quiet darkness of your own sleep, the same essential work continues that has been going on for millennia. The mysterious process by which rest restores not just our bodies, but our souls. Memories settle into their proper places, insights crystallize in the depths of consciousness, and tomorrow's inspirations take shape in the fertile darkness of the dreaming mind. Perhaps you'll dream of melting clocks or midnight walks through gaslit streets. Perhaps you'll find yourself in Tesla's peaceful laboratory or Churchill's afternoon sanctuary. Or perhaps your dreams will be entirely your own, unique visions that could only arise from your particular mind, with its own history and hopes and creative possibilities. Whatever form your rest takes, know that it serves not just your immediate need for restoration, but the deeper purpose of keeping alive the flame of human creativity and wonder. In your sleep, you join the great conversation that has been going on between consciousness and rest as long as humans have closed their eyes and surrendered to the mystery of dreams. Sleep well, knowing that in your rest you participate in one of life's most profound and necessary arts. And may you wake, like all the great minds we visited tonight, refreshed and ready to contribute your own unique gifts to the ongoing story of human achievement and wonder. The gentle wisdom of rest embraces you now, as it has embraced all the dreamers and doers who came before, and as it will embrace all those yet to come. In this eternal rhythm of sleeping and waking, resting and creating, you are both student and teacher, both inheritor and pioneer in the ancient art of being beautifully, restoratively, and creatively human. Sleep now and dream well.